Welcome to From X to Z, the show that believes you never age out of learning about the world around you. Featuring social media maven Danielle Farage and Mervyn, the analyst who puts the X in expert. They're here to talk all things jobs, HR, and trends. So mind the generational gap. This is From X to Z, only on the Purple Acorn Network.
Hello, hello. Welcome back to From X to Z. I'm Danielle Farage, and I'm joined by the incredible Mervyn Dinnen, analyst and Gen expert, who we are all very grateful is here. Mervyn, how you doing?
I'm doing well. I'm doing good, Danielle. It's a pleasure to be talking to you again today,
Oh, you're
and
so kind.
I'm really looking forward to this conversation.
Me too. It's a bit of a different convo than we usually have, less so about generations and more about ChatGPT making you stupider. Yeah, it's kind of crazy. I've been hearing about this for a couple of weeks. I think this came out a couple weeks ago. But essentially, there has been a brain scan essentially looking into the impact of ChatGPT and similar tools like it on the brain and on critical thinking specifically. Now, this country, and I think all across the world, we're having a little bit of a critical thinking crisis, what I like to call, because of social media and because our attention spans are less than 8 seconds. And we are being fed a lot of content that aligns with that. And the content that doesn't is actually a lot of the content that helps us learn how to do things like critical thinking in schools, in college, etc. So I thought it would be a great time, given our conversation last episode about AI and how we're using it in different use cases, to talk about the actual potential impact and how not only should we be thinking about AI now, but we should also be thinking about how we teach our children and the next generations how to use it and how we integrate it into learning, which I think is a very hot topic right now in the education uh, industry.
Mm. Definitely, and I think that the at the beginning of ChatGPT and things, there was, I suppose, from the older, the Gen X and older, people weren't really convinced by it. There was a general, feeling that, how can you trust this? How can you, it's kind of how do you know it's real? And there's been, a general distrust, I suppose, over the internet since the dawn of time from the internet. But it's this kind of it kind of played into those biases. Um, and it would dumb down education, it would dumb down our people, they wouldn't have to think for themselves. But I think that it's what to me is crucial is understanding and it's learning almost to how to work out what is important, what isn't important, what might need a little bit of further investigation, what might not. And I think helping us to think and analyze in slightly different ways.
Mm, I like it. Yeah, it's something I haven't thought about but previously, but I have read an article also about the different impacts of how we learn right now in schools with lots of games and how that impacts the brain. So let's dive into the article we're talking about this week. If we could pull that up. So perfect. So yeah. So the headline is pretty catchy. Using ChatGPT, it might make you stupid in all caps. Brain scans reveal how using AI erodes critical thinking skills. And essentially what we're looking at is a brain scan where it's showing, the different amounts of brain activity going on when you're using ChatGPT, when you're searching, when you're thinking. And what's fascinating to me is that there is this one part of the article where they kind of talk about it's better to come up with, let's say, an essay or whatever you're trying to do on your own and then use ChatGPT to refine it versus using ChatGPT from the outset, right? To write an article for you. Reminds me of how people are kind of using tools to apply to jobs and write cover letters and things like that for them, without necessarily even reading the prompt, just kind of copying and pasting it into ChatGPT. But Mervyn, what do you think about what's your kind of first initial thoughts on the article when you read this headline specifically?
Well, it's sensationalist, obviously. It's to my mind, I know the journal, or certainly the UK journal that this came from, or sorry, UK newspaper that this came from,
Mm,
which I know likes to scare its readership tends to be middle aged and above, so it's kind of more more X and boomer and stuff, and they want to be shocked and horrified by the youth of today. It was always that way.
yeah.
It was always that way. When I was the youth of today, these newspapers were always kind of making out the youth of today are terrible. Um, and so there's always that, and it's a bit comforts, I suppose, to people. So I mean, it didn't surprise me, but I think I mean, and also it doesn't surprise me that using ChatGPT, using AI for a lot of your basic thinking and structuring of thoughts and structuring of stuff might, I don't know about making you stupid, but obviously will impact the brain power you use, and it might begin to, but I don't, in a small way, negatively impact your critical thinking abilities,
Hmm.
or rather capabilities. Um, but I suppose, I mean, that to me isn't a surprise. I know it's a shock horror for some, but it's kind of it if you think about it, it is, yeah. I mean, well, sit down to write a cover letter and then go into Chat GPT and write a cover letter for, an analyst and gen expert applying for a job to advise an organization. It's clearly what Chat GPT would write from that. I think, oh, well, that's much better than I can do. Yeah.
Yeah. But
Uh,
also cover letters are something that most recruiters don't read.
Well, again, yeah, I agree.
Yeah.
I mean, I was kind of, I was a
Yeah.
recruiter for a long time. Now, I can't say that I never read a cover letter, obviously, but I mean, I suppose when you got an application, you went straight to the CV. You had a quick skim of the cover letter, but it was the CV. What are they doing now? What have they done? How often have they moved jobs? The kind of thing. What do they list as their skills and specialist
Yeah.
areas? That's the kind of thing you want to know first, because you've got a client who wants to interview people and you want to make sure you're putting the right people in front of them.
It's while you were kind of talking, I was thinking about the point of singularity, right? That we'll reach. Eventually we will a lot of people will have a chip. Like it's
Yeah.
kind of crazy how real Black Mirror actually is and
Mm.
is turning out to be in real
Yeah.
life. But I was scrolling Instagram as I usually do, and there was this story about this guy who's like, I want to wait to have kids until you could put a chip in them because those kids who have a chip from the outset are going to be so much more are going to have such a leg up comparatively to kids who don't have a chip in them, in terms of the thinking. And I think it's really, when you think about that, it's like, well, yeah, a lot of the things that ChatGPT can do or knows are essentially going to be like irrelevant. Not, you don't need necessarily to know how to write a cover letter or to write one, uh, period. So I think a lot of the things that we're seeing them test, right? And maybe I'm wrong in saying this, but I think the other aspects of thinking, um, are going to be more relevant for people. The other aspects of soft skills and how do you relate to people and how do you draw connections between things and how do you notice themes within books and within reading, and how quickly can you kind of identify those. I think one of the biggest one of the biggest pain points that ChatGPT has solved for me in my thinking has been summarizing things.
Mm.
In
Yeah.
school, it was my least favorite activity and exercise to do was, okay, read this page and summarize it in like 2 sentences. The worst thing ever because my reading comprehension was not good when I was young, and I was just like, "What's the point of this?" Like, couldn't you just have the internet do it for you? You know,
Mm.
like those there's, what was it called? The reading, websites where you would kind of look at, "Well, what's this book about?" And it would Goodreads, maybe it was that.
Yeah.
But that just kind of felt so obvious to me that that wouldn't be something that I should be doing. But at the same time, you could argue that that's a really great skill to have. So, like, it's kind of like my point is, I think that this challenge, this pain point, or this identified risk might just be a temporary thing that we're trying to obviously scare people with and sensationalize when in reality, like, this will be normal. Like, of course, technology is changing the way that our brains work. It already has so significantly.
Oh, definitely. But I mean, it's it's another iteration of something. I mean, as you were talking, I was thinking back to maybe examples when I was earlier in the workplace, and I've spoken on previous episodes that I trained as an accountant and everything, um, and it wasn't unusual for a manager or partner to say to me, "Right, I've got a meeting with XXX client this afternoon. Yeah, you've been looking at the file, or you did some stuff on the audit. What do I need to know?" Which I would then have to go through the files and come up with 3 or
Right.
4 things. Yeah, they might, "Oh, they did it, write to us about this, and we we haven't answered it yet." But that is obviously so now that wouldn't need to be done because, I mean, it's kind of like, the guy can just go in himself, "What do I need to know about the Farage case or the Farage file or something?" And it will give it the 4 or 5 things it needs to know. So, I mean, that kind of you know, thinking has always been there. It's just a new way of doing it. And it might be that if you're taking away from the trainee Mervyn the ability to go through a file and work out what was most important somebody would need to know and then write that down, um, then you're replacing it with something, I suppose, a bit different. In that
Mhm.
Mervyn's time of doing that can now be utilized doing something else.
Right. And at the same time, the risk of not having trainee Mervyn go through the entire
Yeah.
file
Yeah.
is that he loses the context. He loses the knowledge, of how are documents usually organized. And can I write a document like this in the future when I'm at, this level of my career? And, can do I understand the stakeholders and like all of the kind of other factors,
Mm.
and the context surrounding the task that I think is at risk of being lost. And I was talking to someone this past weekend about, the actually this, like this exact topic, because I think I had mentioned this article. Um, and he was saying that one of the reasons why he's actually grateful for having the experience of going through a document, quote unquote, let's just say, that's the task is
Mm.
you do learn a lot of the context. You do learn how things are supposed to be structured. And you do learn a lot of, those kind of things that you don't necessarily think that you're even learning that can contribute to your success and can contribute to you maybe getting promoted faster because you just are aware and you're already maybe doing the job, that you'd be promoted to, because you just know how to do it. You know how things are done. So I think that's a potential risk of like, and I see this already happening with the generation, with Gen Z is like you do the bare minimum and you don't necessarily go above and beyond, not just because you don't think you have to, but also because you might not be looking into it enough. You might not be investigating what more is it that I can do? What more do I have at my disposal to kind of to investigate and to act on? Um, so I think that's also a piece of this article that it's kind of alluding to as well, in those risks.
Yeah, I mean, there's obviously, I suppose, the critical thinking aspects and the fact that we can. This is uh, bringing it down to the kind of, 5 things I need to know about, where there's probably 25 things you need to know about something, but it's kind of like, what are the 5 things I need to know? And so I suppose it is a bit of, I hate the expression dumbing down, but I can see why people think that it would be. But I suppose if we're taking away some of the critical thinking and analyst analytical from somebody, what is it being replaced with? Is it
Mm,
is this giving us opportunity to have access to even more knowledge? Is this enabling us to maybe look at things from a very different angle or very different perspective, rather? To maybe think, well, because I'm not spending all that time finding out these key facts, I can look at this a different way now. Um, and almost you could turn it on its head and say, okay, these are the 5 things I know about the Farage file. What give me 4 things that I don't know about it that I really should before I meet.
for sure.
Um, yeah. So I was,
Yeah.
it can be turned, um, but it's kind. I can understand that a lot of the knowledge work that we do, and not just the knowledge work, because even the jobs, whether you work in a factory or whatever, or an airline, or you've still learnt the basics of how to do the job. But I suppose if you take away from the knowledge work, the need to do the basic stuff, which I suppose AI can now do. It's then maybe gives us opportunities to think more strategically about things or
Right.
in a different way about things.
Right. And to that point too, it's like you think about the intern experience today. And one of the biggest complaints for interns generally, and I know I went through this, is like, I don't have anything to do, or
Mm,
the work that I'm doing is so menial and like so boring. And I remember working at a company and like assigning tasks to an intern from my manager and being like, wow, this would suck. Like, this is like a horrible task to ask someone to do, where now, years later, you could essentially just put this into ChatGPT and it would be done in 25 seconds, right? And so I think also the rate at which things have changed creates, and this is being talked about a lot, is it creates this opportunity, you could call it that, but also you could call it the opposite of that, which is you're doing more uh more like intense, more complex tasks as a young person, as an intern.
mm,
And I think there's two sides of the coin, right? It's like, well, that's a good thing because young people are being exposed to harder tasks earlier on, which makes them better workers, which makes them more hireable. But then the other side of the coin is, well, it takes away a lot of jobs, a lot of entry level or internships. And that's what we're seeing now is entry level jobs, are being slashed. Uh,
mm,
as our internship opportunities are being slashed, because it's like, well, I don't even know what work I would assign this person, because the work that I would assign them is now going to take them 5 seconds.
mm,
And so I think that's the problem we're going through now, is like, well, what does an entry level experience look like? Is it more similar to a associate, or
mm,
a middle manager experience, or set of tasks? So I think that's we're kind of experiencing a little bit of like a reckoning in that department right now, because it's
mm,
like, of the people I know who are doing internships, many of them had such a hard time even landing the job,
mm,
and many of them who are in that job are either doing really menial tasks, or they work at a startup and they're doing like a lot of work, a lot of new work with AI and like
mm,
working on really exciting things that another entry level person, 3 years ago would not get the experience of doing.
mm, mm.
So I think we're kind of in this like transitional phase right now of entry level and internship.
Yeah, no, I would agree. I would agree. In fact, the article that it sprung from, rather than being horrified about this whole thing, is almost it should be, you know, what not what is the point of, but what is an entry level job now?
Yeah.
What is a trainee job? How do we prepare people for a future world of work, which every year is different anyway? So it's kind of um, it's. I think part of the problem with again the article we started with was it looks at a typically structured career kind of, and then is horrified that some of this is being peeled away because of ChatGPT, AI, and things. But the question is, okay, that's there. That's not going away. It's only going to get better and better and more embedded. So, what is the role of entry level of training? What's the role of education? Maybe that's another episode now. But what is the role of all these things in preparing somebody for life?
hmm Yeah. It's a good question. Um, yeah, this is I love this topic,
Mm,
especially because, you know, I think our brains are probably very different. If you were to compare, your brain and my brain, the way that I've been exposed to technology, that is, I think, like on a different level, and also social media from the age of, 12. I think that probably alters your brain a lot. And I think that that's also the reason why we're seeing such high levels of mental health problems with this generation is the constant comparison, the constant, going on social media, getting your dopamine. And one of the things that I think has stood out to me, that I read a couple weeks ago is the way that we're learning has changed so much. There's a lot more games being integrated into the classroom. And Scott Galloway, I think, was the one that was talking about this. It's like, what is the impact of that on people's brains? The impact of, and what happens when you play a game is, dopamine is released. And what happens when you play a game in one class, for 40 minutes, whatnot, and then you switch to another class and you go into like writing,
mm,
and writing requires a lot more critical thinking. Well, you have a lot less dopamine. Your brain doesn't like it. And you're constantly looking for, well, what's the next hit of dopamine I can get? A lot, big reason why phones are being banned in schools right now is like kids are constantly craving it and craving
mm,
that hit of dopamine. And I think that the exposure and that the ease of access to that is, in my opinion, concerning, but also makes you question, well, how much should games and play be integrated into not only school and learning, but also work?
mm.
It's a question. I think it's like much bigger than, just you and me. I think it's
Yeah.
kind of for the entire education system and industry. But I think also relates to this idea of how is technology helping or hurting us, and how are these seemingly small changes and innovations actually changing and, yeah, chemically changing the way that we do things, the way that we think.
Mm. Yeah. No, definitely. It's the kind of people often say to me, from older generation than me, we're doing away with people. What's the future for people? We don't need people anymore. It's kind of and I said, no, you do. You're always going to need people. There's always been new jobs, new things for people to do that will be invented. Um, but yeah, in terms of the internship, in terms of the trainee, which is important because it's how people get started, the kind of learning you have, and the kind of structured training I went through straight from college. I mean, it kind of still exists in the professions, but not in the same way. And the kind of basic training you would have done with fairly standard jobs when you go in as a trainee, and you kind of just are taught what to do from stage one, and you watch what other people do, and then you do what they're doing, and that whole thing has now shifted. Um,
Hmm.
and I'm not sure, I mean, instead of that, you're given a manual to go through. Well, you're not given a manual, you're sent something on an email to open up and go
Yeah.
through and work through. Um, and it is different, and I suppose some of that will come down to how the education system prepares people for that, and how they break the kind of uh, structured way the education system has always been. At each different age level, you learn different things, and that's when you start to learn about that, and that's when you start to learn about that. Because yeah, once a child can read, it can pick up someone's phone and ask Google questions, ask AI questions,
Hmm. Yeah.
and so it's
There's
kind of like,
yeah. There's even a school that is the kids are taught entirely by AI. Did you read about that? I think it's in Texas.
I'd heard about it, I've not read much about it.
Yeah, read a little about it. Um, but anyway, very interesting stuff.
Yeah,
I am excited to see how we approach these challenges. Are we bringing more play into work? Probably not. I don't know. We have no idea. Are we bringing more AI into work? Definitely. Uh, and how is that going to change the way that we think? I have no idea. But I do know that in person and interpersonal skills are the most important they've ever been, and will continue to get more important. So that's what I'm trying to hone and
yeah,
trying to tell my fellow Gen Zers. Um, and yeah, that's what's on my mind. So anyway, thank you so much for tuning in, everyone, to from another episode of From X to Z. Let us know what you think about this in the comments. Are you concerned about ChatGPT and AI and how they're impacting our brains? What do you think about it? And how are you focusing on educating your own kids? And
yeah.
that was kind of also an interesting part of this that I'd be curious to hear about from parents. So yeah, thank you so much, and we'll see you back here next week, every Wednesday.
And let us know in the comments if you want an episode hosted entirely by Danielle Bottom Mervbot. I think it's unlikely to happen, but you know what? We'll see what we can do.
That's amazing. I love it. We could try it out with Google's podcast thing.
Yeah.
Maybe we'll try that. All right. Thanks so much, and see you soon.
See you soon.
Bye.
Bye.